Fire doesn't lie. It strips away everything that was never real. The titles, the vows, the diamonds, the performance of love. And at 2:47 in the morning, inside the most fortified estate in all of Seoul, fire came to collect the truth. The wife of the most feared man in Korea's underworld didn't scream. She didn't run to her children. She walked, calmly, deliberately, to her vanity mirror, unclipped her pearl earrings, and placed them inside her Hermes bag. Then she got into a black car, and she drove away. But in the East Wing, past the burning corridor, past the collapsing ceiling, past the smoke so thick it turned daylight into midnight, a girl nobody bothered to learn the name of was running toward the sound of 3 babies crying. She had no title, no bloodline, no reason. Just her hands, her breath, and a love she had no right to feel, and no intention of stopping. Tonight, Kumajok, the man who built an empire on knowing exactly who his enemies are, is about to discover that the most dangerous person in his world isn't the syndicate at his gates. It's the quiet girl he never once looked at, the one who just saved everything he was too busy protecting to actually hold. The silence of a mansion so large, so perfectly temperature-controlled, so obsessively designed, that even the air feels like it costs something. 2 a.m. The Majok Estate, Gangnam District, Seoul. Jennifer is on her knees, not in prayer, in service. Her dark hands, slender and sure, move a cloth across marble floors in long, practiced strokes. The fluorescent light above the kitchen hums faintly. Her braids are pinned back. Her uniform is pressed. Her face is still. Not the stillness of someone who is at peace, but the stillness of someone who has learned that being invisible is the only safe thing to be in this house. She has worked in the Majok estate for 11 months. 11 months of pressing fine suits she'll never wear, feeding children she'll never call her own, and moving through hallways without making a sound. Because that is the rule for women like her in places like this. Be useful, but be unseen. She doesn't mind. She didn't come here for comfort. She came here for information. Somewhere above her, on the penthouse floor of the estate's private tower, a silhouette stands behind reinforced glass. Ku Majok, 41 years old, head of the Majok syndicate. The man Seoul's newspapers call a business magnate, and Seoul's underworld calls something far less polite. He hasn't slept in 3 days. He is watching the city like it owes him something, and by most accounts, it does. He doesn't know Jennifer's last name. He has never asked. He is about to spend the rest of his life wishing he had asked sooner. 2:43 a.m. The first window shatters, not from the wind, from a bottle. And inside that bottle, flame. The alarm that was supposed to sound in 4 seconds takes 11. Someone in this house made sure of that. The East Wing ignites. The nursery, where 3 10-month-old boys sleep in matching cribs, their small chests rising and falling, utterly unaware that their mother is already in a car 2 kilometers away, fills with smoke. Miso, Hari, June, 3 babies. 3 reasons Jennifer drops her cloth, abandons every instinct telling her to run, and instead turns toward the burning corridor like something ancient and unbothered by fear has been switched on inside her chest. She doesn't hesitate. She doesn't calculate. She moves. And when Kumajok's car finally pulls through the gates, his empire burning, his wife gone, his world reduced to rubble and rain, the first thing he sees is Jennifer, standing in the garden. Soot on her face, smoke in her braids, 3 babies pressed against her chest, each one silent now, each one safe, because she made them safe. He is one of the most powerful men alive, and in that moment, he has never felt so small. This is the night everything changes. For her, for him, for the empire that's about to go to war over what and who belongs at its center. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is reaching. Nobody told Jennifer that the night she almost died would be the same night she finally started to live. She didn't know it yet. She was too busy on her knees. 2 a.m. Marble floors. A mop she'd wrung out 3 times already because Mrs. Majok had walked through the kitchen that afternoon, glanced at the tiles without stopping, and said, to no one, to the air, to the general concept of Jennifer's existence, "It smells like someone's village in here." No name, no eye contact, just that. Dropped like ash from a cigarette and left to burn. Jennifer had nodded, smiled, the smile she'd spent 11 months perfecting, small, contained, erased in under a second, and gone back to work. She was still going back to work. The Majok estate didn't sleep. It hummed. Security cameras rotated on silent motors. The smart home system adjusted the temperature every 40 minutes. Somewhere on the second floor, one of the triplets, Hari most likely, he was always the restless one, had kicked his blanket off again. Jennifer knew because the baby monitor on the kitchen counter flickered with the soft sound of shuffling, and without thinking, without even standing up from the floor, she reached over and turned the volume up slightly, just to make sure he settled. He did. He always did when she was listening. That was the thing about Miso, Hari, and June that nobody in this house seemed to notice. Or maybe they noticed and simply didn't care. Those three boys, 10 months old and already full of opinions about the world, had decided somewhere around month 3 of Jennifer's employment that she was theirs. Not their mother's. Not the nanny the agency had sent before Jennifer, who had lasted 6 days before quitting without explanation. Theirs. It had started with Miso. She'd been warming his bottle one morning. 4 a.m., the ungodly hour that belonged only to newborns and the desperate, when he'd reached up from his crib and grabbed her finger with a grip so certain, so completely without doubt, that Jennifer had stood there for a full 30 seconds, just staring at his tiny hand wrapped around hers. He didn't cry. He just held on, like he already knew something she didn't. By month 5, all three of them screamed if she left the room too quickly. By month 7, Jun had developed a habit of patting her face with both hands every morning like he was confirming she was real. By month 9, Hari, who was crawling now and deeply proud of it, had started following her to the kitchen door and sitting there, watching her work, occasionally banging a plastic spoon against the floor in what Jennifer had privately decided was encouragement. She'd laughed the first time. Actually laughed, in this house, which almost surprised her. The housekeeper, Mrs. O, a small, sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who had worked for the Majok family for 2 decades and had the posture of someone who had survived things she would never discuss, had looked up from the stove and raised an eyebrow. "You know what that means," Mrs. O had said. "That he has no sense of rhythm?" Jennifer replied. Mrs. O had pressed her lips together in the way she did when something almost made her smile. "It means they chose you. In this house, that's not nothing." Jennifer had looked at Hari, still banging his spoon, deeply satisfied with himself. "He's going to wake his brothers." "He already did," Mrs. O said, and sure enough, the monitor crackled with the sounds of Miso and Jun stirring. Jennifer had sighed, wiped her hands on her apron, and gone to them. She always went to them. That was the invisible architecture of her days, the unwritten schedule that existed underneath the official one. Official schedule said, clean the east wing by 6, prepare breakfast by 7, assist with laundry by 9. The real schedule said, check on the boys at midnight, warm Hari's bottle before he worked himself into a full panic, make sure June's stuffed bear hadn't fallen behind the crib again because he would not sleep without it, and he had a surprisingly loud voice for someone who weighed 9 kilograms. Minhee's schedule said, do not disturb before 10 a.m. The boy's mother existed in the estate the way a painting exists in a museum. Present, expensive, and completely untouchable. She moved through the house in silk robes and expensive perfume, her nails always fresh, her phone always in her hand. She was not a cruel woman, Jennifer had decided. She was something quieter and more permanent than cruel. She was simply absent, not just from the nursery, but from everything, from her marriage, from her own life. Like she had agreed to play a role a long time ago and had since forgotten why she'd auditioned. She came to the nursery perhaps twice a day, usually in the mornings when the light was good for photographs. She would stand at the edge of the room in something beautiful, hold one of the boys for approximately 90 seconds, long enough for a picture, short enough to avoid a spit-up situation, and then hand him back. To Jennifer. Always to Jennifer. And Jennifer would take him, settle him against her shoulder, and feel the way he immediately relaxed, that full-body surrender that babies do when they know they are exactly where they are supposed to be. And she would say nothing, and Minhee would leave, and the room would return to the temperature it was always at when it was just the 4 of them. Warm, steady, real. One evening in the 7th month, Minhee had drifted into the nursery later than usual, slightly unsteady on her heels, phone already in hand. Jennifer was sitting in the rocking chair with Jun, who was fighting sleep with every ounce of his tiny, furious willpower. Minhee had watched for a moment. Then she said, not unkindly, "How do you do that?" Jennifer looked up. Do what? Make them calm. She gestured vaguely at Jun, whose eyes were now at half-mast, his protests fading into small, defeated sighs. They cry for me. They always cry for me. Jennifer didn't know what to say to that. She chose honesty, which was always dangerous. They don't cry because they don't want you. They cry because they don't know you yet. Minhee looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes, something tired and old and not entirely without feeling. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at it, and she left. Jennifer rocked Jun in the silence. "Your mother is complicated," she told him quietly. Jun made a sound that might have been agreement and finally closed his eyes. The night of the attack began like every other night, which is the most terrifying thing about disasters. They don't announce themselves. They don't give you a moment to prepare. One second the world is the world, and the next second the world is on fire, and you are standing in the wreckage wondering how you didn't see it coming. Jennifer had finished the floors by 2:30 a.m. She was wringing out the mop for the last time, her back aching in that specific way it always did after a long shift when her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from her contact. 3 words. "It's happening tonight." She went still. Her contact, a man she knew only as Mr. Park, who passed her information in exchange for the evidence she was slowly, carefully building inside this house, had been warning her for weeks that the Jade Dragon Syndicate was moving. They were getting impatient. They wanted the Majok financial ledgers, the encrypted files that Jennifer had spent 11 months getting close enough to access, and they were done waiting for the diplomatic route. She'd known something was coming. She hadn't known it would be tonight. She looked at the baby monitor. Hari was shuffling again. Okay, she thought. Okay, think. She needed to get the files. Get out. Be 3 streets away before anything happened. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. The boys would be fine. The estate had 12 security personnel on a night shift. Ku Majok's sons were the most protected children in Seoul. They would be fine. She picked up her phone. She looked at the monitor. Hari had settled. Miso was breathing in the slow, perfect rhythm of deep sleep. Jun had one arm thrown over his face the way he always slept, like he was bracing for something. They'll be fine, she told herself. She was already moving toward the study where the secondary server was housed when she heard it. Not an alarm, not a crash, but something smaller and more sinister. The specific silence that falls over a house when the power has been deliberately cut. Every light went out at once. The security system's backup generator kicked on 3 seconds later, which meant 3 seconds of complete darkness, and more importantly, 3 seconds in which every electronic lock in the estate disengaged. Jennifer froze in the hallway. Then she smelled it. Gasoline. Faint but unmistakable, threading through the ventilation from the east side of the building. No, she thought. Not like this. Not tonight. Not with them inside. She was already turning back toward the nursery when the first window shattered. The sound cracked through the house like a gunshot. Glass, then a deep percussive thud, then the orange bloom of fire catching on the curtains of the east sitting room, reflected in the glass of the hallway that connected it to the main wing. And then, from somewhere above, from the master suite on the 2nd floor, she heard heels on marble. Fast, deliberate, heading away from the nursery. Jennifer ran to the base of the staircase. She looked up. Minhee was on the landing. She was dressed, fully dressed, not in night clothes, not in the silk robe she wore every other evening, but in a deep green coat, her hair pinned, her Hermes bag on her arm. Her pearl earrings caught the emergency lighting. She had known. The realization hit Jennifer like cold water. She had known this was coming. Their eyes met across the staircase. For 1 second, one single suspended second, something passed across Minhee's face. Not guilt, exactly. More like the expression of someone who has already calculated the cost of a decision and decided they can live with it. "Mrs. Majok," Jennifer said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "The boys, the security team will handle it," Minhee said. She was already moving down the stairs, angling toward the private garage entrance. Not the nursery, not the 2nd floor where her sons were sleeping. "The security system just went down," Jennifer said. "The lock's disengaged. Anyone can—" "I said the security team will handle it." Sharper now. A warning. Don't. Jennifer stared at her. Minhee reached the bottom of the stairs. She paused just for a moment, her hand on the door to the garage. She didn't turn around. You should leave too, she said quietly, while you can. Then the door opened. Then it closed. And Jennifer stood alone in the flickering emergency light while the smell of smoke grew thicker and the sound of the fire consuming the east wing grew louder, and upstairs, upstairs, upstairs. Miso began to cry. 1 second of stillness. 1 breath. Then Jennifer ran. The staircase was clear. The second-floor hallway was not. Smoke was already threading under the door that connected the residential wing to the east corridor, thin gray fingers reaching across the floor. Jennifer didn't stop. She pushed through the nursery door, and the smoke was already there, thin but present, and the boys were awake, all 3 of them. Miso screaming with the full conviction of someone who knew something was deeply wrong. Harry sitting up in his crib with wide, terrified eyes, and June standing, actually standing, gripping the crib rail, staring at the door like he'd been waiting for her. I'm here, she said. Her voice broke on the second word. She didn't let it break again. I'm here. I've got you. All of you. She went to Miso first because he was loudest, which meant he was the most afraid. She pulled him out of his crib and pressed him against her chest and said, low and close to his ear, You're okay. I've got you. Stop screaming so I can think. He didn't stop screaming, but it dropped by half. She went to Jun. He lifted his arms before she reached him. This baby, this 10-month-old boy, already understanding that raised arms meant take me, I trust you, and she tucked him against her other side. Hari was watching her from his crib with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life. Not crying, not screaming, just watching with those dark, steady eyes, waiting to see what she would do. Your turn, she told him. She couldn't carry all 3. She physically couldn't do it. She'd done the math before, in the abstract, the way you do when you work in a house with a powerful man who has enemies and you think about exits. 2 at a time was her limit. But putting one down in a room that was filling with smoke was not something her body would agree to do, so she gathered Hari under her arm like in Mrs. O's words from the week before, after watching Jennifer bathe all 3 simultaneously. A woman with absolutely no fear of chaos, and she stood up with all 3 of them, and immediately her knees screamed at her. This is fine, she told her knees. We're not doing this right now. The hallway was worse than it had been 60 seconds ago. The smoke was thicker, lower, and the door at the end was glowing faintly. Not flame yet, but heat, the wood beginning to give. She needed water. She needed to wet something to put over their faces. She needed to move fast and stay low and not panic. And she needed to do all of this simultaneously while holding 3 babies who collectively weighed more than 25 kilograms. And the part of her brain that had spent 2 years watching her father, Colonel Adisa, UN Peacekeeping Corps, the finest tactical mind she had ever known, run crisis drills in their backyard in Lagos, clicked on like a switch. Assess, adapt, move. Don't stop moving. She turned back into the nursery, grabbed the basin from the changing table, turned on the tap in the small attached bathroom, still running, thank God, and soaked 3 muslin wraps in cold water, working one-handed, Miso on her hip starting to cough, June making small frightened sounds against her shoulder. Almost, she told them. Almost. She wrapped the damp muslin around Miso's face loosely, enough to filter smoke, not enough to frighten him further. He grabbed it with both hands and tried to pull it off immediately. Leave it, she told him. He considered her. He left it. She did the same for Jun, who accepted his without argument. He was always the most trusting, her Jun. And then she looked at Hari, still tucked under her arm. I need you to hold yours, she told him. He was 10 months old. He could not understand her. But she said it anyway, and she pressed the wet cloth against his face, and he reached up and held it. He held it. She could have cried. She didn't. She moved. Down the hallway, low and fast, one hand on the wall to navigate through smoke that was now thick enough to obscure the emergency lighting. The heat was building behind them. She could feel it on the back of her neck. Her eyes burned. Her lungs were starting to register their protest in that deep, tight way that meant the smoke was real and the damage was accumulating, and she had maybe another 90 seconds of clear function before her body started negotiating terms. The back staircase. She'd mapped it in her 3rd week. Every exit, every secondary route, every structural weakness in a building she was supposed to clean but had instead memorized. The back staircase was narrower, further from the east wing fire, and it emptied into the kitchen garden. She hit the staircase door shoulder first. 12 steps. She counted them. 12 steps, while her lungs seized on the fourth, while Miso began crying again on the seventh, while she felt June's small hand grip the collar of her uniform on the ninth, like he was trying to help carry the weight. She pushed through the ground floor exit. Cold air. Seoul at 2:51 a.m., damp with the end of rain. The sky in the east already touched orange from the fire consuming the estate's wing behind her. Jennifer walked 8 steps into the garden, then her legs made their final decision, and she sat down on the wet grass, all 3 boys still against her, and she breathed. 1 breath, 2, 3. Miso pulled the muslin off his face and looked at her with enormous, furious eyes, like he wanted to file a formal complaint about the entire evening. "I know," she told him, her voice rough and wrecked and tasting of smoke. "I know, you can scream about it later." He burst into tears. She held him tighter. Hari had fallen asleep. Against all logic, against all reason, tucked against her side in the cold garden with the sky burning behind them, Hari had fallen asleep. Mrs. O was going to lose her mind when Jennifer told her. Jun was looking up at her face. His wet cloth had fallen off somewhere on the stairs. There was a small smear of ash on his left cheek, and his eyes were wide and dark and completely unnervingly calm. He patted her cheek with one hand, once, twice, confirming she was real. "I'm here," Jennifer told him. Her eyes burned. From smoke, she told herself, only from smoke. "I'm not going anywhere." She pulled all 3 of them closer, tucked her chin over Miso's head, and watched the gate at the end of the garden's long drive. Somewhere across the city, Kumajok's phone was ringing. Somewhere in the opposite direction, a black car was moving fast through empty Seoul streets, pearls around a neck that had never once bent over a crib in the dark. And in the garden, in the rain-wet grass, in the orange glow of a burning empire, Jennifer sat with 3 boys who were not hers by blood or contract or any law written in any country, and waited. She didn't know, sitting there in the dark with her lungs aching and her arms full, that the man who would soon walk through those gates was about to look at her and feel the specific, terrifying sensation of a man who has been keeping score his entire life, suddenly realizing he's been counting the wrong things. She didn't know that yet. She was just breathing, just holding on, just the way she always had. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is reaching. Koo Majok had seen a lot of things in his life that couldn't be unseen. He'd seen men beg, he'd seen empires fall in a single phone call, he'd seen the inside of a room where loyalty went to die. He was not, by any measure, a man who was easily moved. But when his car pulled through the gates of his burning estate at 3:14 a.m. and his headlights swept across the garden, and he saw her, something happened in his chest that he did not have a name for and would spend a long time pretending hadn't happened at all. She was sitting in the wet grass, uniform torn at the shoulder, braids loose, half undone, gray with ash. Her face was streaked with soot and something that might have been blood from a cut above her eyebrow that she clearly hadn't noticed yet. Her eyes were half closed. Her breathing was labored in the way that made the 2 bodyguards who reached her first immediately radio for the medic. And pressed against her, tucked into her arms, against her chest, under her chin, distributed across her body, with the chaotic efficiency of 3 small boys who had collectively decided she was the safest place in the world, were his sons. All 3 of them. Alive. Asleep. Koo stepped out of the car. His head of security, Baek, was already talking. East wing fully compromised, accelerant confirmed, security grid was manually disabled from inside. "We're pulling the logs now, sir, your wife's." "Where is my wife?" Silence. Baek didn't answer immediately, which was an answer. Koo looked at him. "She left, sir. Before the fire started. Private car. We have footage." The words landed. Koo processed them the way he processed everything, quickly, completely, then filed behind a face that gave nothing away. He would deal with that later. He would deal with all of it later. Right now, he was walking toward the girl in the grass. He crouched down in front of her. This close, he could hear that her breathing wasn't just labored, it was wrong. The specific tight, catching quality of lungs that had taken in too much smoke. Her lips had a faint gray tinge. Her hands, even in sleep, were wrapped around his son's with a grip that hadn't fully released. He had employed this woman for 11 months. He knew her first name because it was on her contract. He knew her role because Mrs. O reported to him weekly. He knew she was African, Nigerian, he thought, or possibly Ghanaian. He had never asked, and that she was quiet and competent, and that the boys apparently liked her. He had never once looked at her. Not really. Not like this. He looked at her now. She opened her eyes. They were dark brown, almost black, and even through the smoke haze and the exhaustion, they were sharp. She registered him, registered who he was, and immediately started to move, started to pull herself upright, that instinctive correction of posture that people in service learned early. Don't be caught sitting in the presence of the man who signs your checks. Don't, he said. She stopped. Don't move. His voice came out lower than he intended. Stay still. She looked at him. Then she looked down at the boys against her, then back at him and said, her voice wrecked, barely above a whisper, rough as gravel. They're okay. I checked them. No burns. The smoke exposure was minimal. I kept their faces covered. Hari fell asleep on the way out, which I know sounds alarming, but he's breathing fine. I've been monitoring. I can see that. Miso has been crying on and off, but I think it's more anger than distress. He's been doing that thing where Jennifer. She stopped. He almost never said her name. She could tell, from the slight pause before it, that it felt unfamiliar in his mouth, like a word in a language he understood but had never spoken aloud. You're injured, he said. It's minor. You're not breathing correctly. I'm breathing fine. As if to disprove this, she took a slightly deeper breath and immediately pressed her lips together against a cough that clearly wanted to be much larger than she was letting it be. Ku looked at her for a long moment. The medic is going to take you to the clinic, he said. Now. I don't want to let them go, she said. It came out before she could stop it. He saw the flicker of something. Embarrassment, maybe, or the specific vulnerability of a feeling admitted out loud that was meant to stay inside. She straightened slightly. They've had a frightening night. I'd rather stay with them until they're properly settled. They'll be with me. She looked at him, and he understood the look. She wasn't being insubordinate. She was assessing whether he actually meant it, whether he would hold them through the rest of the night, whether the boys would wake up in an hour, disoriented and afraid, and find a stranger. He held her gaze. I have them, he said. Something in her face shifted, slowly, like a door opening for the first time in a long while. She let go. He reached down and lifted Miso first, his eldest by 4 minutes, and the boy stirred, made a sound of protest, and then settled against his father's shoulder with a reluctant sigh that was so deeply human it almost made Ku laugh. He passed Miso to Baek, who held the baby with the stiff-armed terror of a man who had handled weapons his entire career and found infants categorically more frightening. Then Jun, who woke fully, looked at his father with calm, assessing eyes and apparently decided this was acceptable. Then Hari, who didn't wake at all. When all three were transferred, Jennifer's arms dropped to her sides. She sat there for a second, empty-handed, and Ku watched something move across her face that he couldn't name. Not relief exactly. More like the feeling after you've been holding your breath for so long you'd forgotten you were doing it. She tried to stand. Her legs had other ideas. Ku caught her before she hit the ground, one hand at her arm, steady, impersonal. And she stiffened immediately, that same reflex. Don't be a burden, don't take up space, don't need anything. I'm fine, she said for approximately the 4th time. You've said that, he replied, and nodded to the medic. She argued the entire way to the clinic. Not loudly. She was too exhausted for loud, but in that consistent low-grade way of someone who was not accustomed to being taken care of and found the experience deeply suspicious. She told the medic her oxygen levels were probably fine. She told him the cut above her eyebrow was superficial. She asked twice whether someone had checked that Jun's muslin wrap hadn't been left on the stairs as a fire hazard. The medic, a young man named Dr. Shin, who had worked for the Majok estate for 3 years and had treated gunshot wounds without blinking, looked slightly overwhelmed. The muslin, he said carefully, is not currently my primary concern. It could cause a secondary ignition if the fire reaches. Ma'am, please breathe into this. She breathed into it. Her oxygen was at 91%, which Dr. Shin said was low enough to warrant the mask and high enough that she would be fine with rest. The cut needed 2 stitches, which she accepted without a sound. The bruising along her left forearm, from where she'd hit the wall in the stairwell in the dark, navigating by feel, she didn't mention at all. He found it when he was checking her arms, and she looked away, out the clinic window at the gray pre-dawn sky, while he documented it. "You should have come in immediately," he told her. "I was busy," she said. He opened his mouth, closed it, wrote something in his notes. She was asleep before he finished. Not gradually, not the slow drift of someone choosing to rest. The immediate, absolute unconsciousness of a body that had simply reached its limit and shut itself down mid-sentence, between one breath and the next. Dr. Shin pulled the blanket up, dimmed the light, and left. And Ku Majok, who had been standing at the clinic door for the last 20 minutes, walked in. He told himself he was checking, that this was practical. She was an employee who had been injured on his property. He was confirming she was stable. This was the kind of thing a man in his position did. It was administrative. It meant nothing. He pulled the chair from the corner to the side of the bed and sat down. The clinic was quiet. Outside, his people were working through the night. Fire contained. East Wing a total loss. Security logs being pulled. A missing wife who was somewhere in this city with his estate's access codes and an explanation he was going to require sooner than she would like. He'd think about Min-hee later. He was good at later. He had a mind like a filing cabinet. Everything had a drawer, every drawer had a lock, and he could decide when to open them. Right now, he was here. He looked at Jennifer. In sleep, she looked younger. The careful stillness she maintained when she was awake. That controlled, watchful expression that he now realized he had mistaken for blankness, but was actually something else entirely, something more like readiness, was gone. Her face was open. Her braids had come mostly loose and spread across the pillow, gray at the ends with ash. The 2 small stitches above her eyebrow were precise and clean. And then he saw the scar. Her left arm was outside the blanket, turned slightly, and in the low light of the clinic, he could see it clearly. A long, healed scar running from just below her elbow toward her wrist. Not an accident. The shape was too deliberate, the angle too specific. Someone who knew what they were doing had given her that scar, and whoever did it had meant it as a message. He looked longer than he should have. Then he saw the second one, smaller, just below her collarbone where the clinic gown had shifted, and the third, barely visible, old and silver white, at the edge of her jaw near her ear. He sat back in his chair. "Who are you, Jennifer?" The question had never occurred to him before tonight. In 11 months, he had never asked it. She was the maid. She was good at her job. She was quiet and she kept to herself, and the boys liked her, and that was the full extent of what he had considered relevant. He was beginning to understand, extremely stupid. He was still sitting in that chair when Bake knocked softly on the clinic door at 5 a.m. Ku stepped outside. Bake handed him a tablet without speaking, which meant the news on the tablet was the kind that required no preamble. He looked at the screen. Security grid breach log. Timestamp 1:47 a.m. Manual override entered from the master suite terminal. Access credentials. Kim Min-hee, authorized user. He read it twice, not because he didn't understand it the first time, because he was giving himself exactly 2 readings to feel what he felt before he put it in its drawer and became functional again. "How long have you known?" he asked Bake. "I pulled the log 40 minutes ago. I came to you immediately. The investigators?" "Already on Min-hee's financial records per your standing order to investigate any internal breach." "Sir." Beck paused, which he almost never did. Bake was ex-Special Forces and had the emotional range of a well-maintained weapon. When he paused, it meant something. "There's more." "Show me." Bake swiped to the next screen. Bank records. A series of wire transfers over the previous 8 months. Irregular amounts, irregular intervals, the specific pattern of someone who understood financial surveillance and was trying to stay beneath it. The receiving account was flagged. Jade Dragon. Shell company, 3 layers deep, but his forensic team was good. 8 months. She had been feeding them for 8 months. Ku handed the tablet back. He looked at the wall. He gave himself 3 seconds. 3 exactly, and then he said, "Find her. Don't touch her. I want her alive, and I want her in this building by nightfall." Understood. And Baik, sir, the girl in the clinic, Jennifer. He said her name the same way he had in the garden, like he was still learning the weight of it. Pull everything. Employment records, background check, the original agency submission, everything. Baik didn't ask why. That was what made him valuable. By morning, Ku said, and walked back to the clinic door. He didn't go back inside. He stood at the door for a moment, his hand on the frame, and looked through the small glass panel at her sleeping. He was thinking about the scars. He was thinking about the way she had argued about June's muslin wrap while her oxygen levels were at 91%. He was thinking about Miso, about how his eldest son, who screamed at strangers, who had cried for 40 minutes straight the day the agency sent a different maid to cover Jennifer's day off, had pressed his face into the hollow of her neck in the garden and stayed there. He was thinking about a woman who ran toward fire. Not away. Toward. In his world, he had paid men extraordinary amounts of money to run toward fire on his behalf. He had contracts and incentives and consequences, a whole architecture of motivation designed to make people do dangerous things for him. Jennifer had done it for free. She had done it for 3 boys who weren't hers. She had done it with no witness, no guarantee, no expectation of anything on the other side. The drawer he'd put Minhee in was cold and quiet. He already knew what it contained. He'd known something was wrong in his marriage for 2 years. Known it the way you know a bridge is weakening, in the vibration before the crack. He had chosen, strategically, not to investigate because the investigation would cost more than the instability, and he was a man who thought in terms of cost. He was beginning to think he'd been calculating wrong. He pushed away from the door. Down the corridor, in the temporary nursery, Mrs. O had assembled with terrifying efficiency at 3:30 a.m., while simultaneously directing the fire containment and making rice porridge, because those boys will be hungry when they wake up and I will not have them distressed and unfed. Baik, move that equipment. His 3 sons were sleeping. He went to them. He stood at the edge of the room for a moment. Miso, Hari, June, 3 small chests rising and falling. 3 lives that had been in a burning building 2 hours ago and were now here, safe, because of a woman with smoke in her braids and a grip that hadn't let go even in unconsciousness. He sat down on the floor between the cribs. It was an undignified position for the head of the Majok syndicate. He didn't care. He sat there in his charcoal suit on the floor of the temporary nursery and listened to his sons breathe, and he thought about the paper trail his investigators were following, and he thought about the scars he hadn't been meant to see. And he thought about a question he should have asked 11 months ago and was going to get the answer to before this day was done. Who are you, Jennifer? He had a feeling the answer was going to change everything. He had a feeling he was already too late to be unaffected by it. Outside, Seoul was beginning its morning. The sky above the estate's ruined east wing was turning the pale, indifferent gray of a city that had seen worse and would see worse again. His investigators were pulling threads. His men were hunting his wife through the streets of a city she thought she knew better than him. She didn't. Nothing in this city moved without his knowing. Nothing disappeared without leaving a shape in the air where it had been. He had built his empire on that truth, on the understanding that information was the only currency that never devalued. Someone had walked into his house for 11 months, and he hadn't looked at her once. That was over now. He looked at Hari, still sleeping with the deep unconscious peace of a child who had decided the world was fundamentally safe. He thought about the way Jennifer had held his face with a wet cloth in a burning hallway and said, "Hold this," to a 10-month-old boy. And the boy had held it. "Who taught you to trust her before I did?" Ku said quietly to his sleeping son. Hari predictably did not answer. Ku stayed on the floor until the light changed. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is reaching. She had packed a single bag. That was the thing that told him everything. Not the resignation letter folded on the kitchen counter, not the way she'd said goodbye to Mrs. O that morning with a hug that lasted 3 seconds too long, but the bag. One bag. 11 months in his house, and she was leaving with exactly what she'd arrived with, like she'd never planned to leave a mark. Jennifer was at the service entrance, her hand on the door, when she heard his footsteps. She didn't turn around. She knew his walk by now, unhurried, deliberate, the walk of a man who had never once in his life felt the need to rush because everything always waited for him. She tightened her grip on the bag strap. "Your letter," Koo said, "is on my desk. I left it in the kitchen. Mrs. O moved it to my desk. She also made a point of telling me where you were, which means she's fired." "She's not fired," Jennifer said. "No," he agreed. "She's not." Silence. She still hadn't turned around. The service door was right there, 12 inches of steel between her and a street and a city and a life that made sense. She had a contact who could get her out of Seoul within 48 hours. She had evidence on a USB drive sewn into the lining of the bag currently on her shoulder. She had a plan. She had always had a plan. "You've seen the paper trail," she said. "It wasn't a question. Yes." "Then you know what Min-hee did. You know what Jade Dragon is. You know what's coming next." She exhaled. "And you know that anyone close to you right now is a target. I've already been here too long. I need to go." "Turn around, Jennifer." She turned around. He was standing in the middle of the corridor, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, which she had learned in 11 months meant he was done performing and intended to be direct. His eyes were doing the thing they'd been doing for the 3 days since the fire, since the clinic, since she'd woken up to find a chair pulled close to her bed and a warmth in the room that had no architectural explanation. Looking at her like he was finishing a calculation he'd started without realizing it. She didn't like being calculated. It made her feel seen in a way she hadn't budgeted for. "I'm a liability," she said. "Jade Dragon knows I'm here. If they've done any investigation, and they have, they're thorough. They know who my father is. They know why I came, which means staying puts the boys at risk, and that's the one thing I won't." "Your father," Koo said, "is Colonel Adisa Mensah, UN Peacekeeping Corps, disgraced and discharged 4 years ago on charges of accepting syndicate bribes. Charges that were filed with documentation provided by a source linked to Jade Dragon's legal division." Jennifer went still. "My investigators are thorough too," he said. "You've known. Since yesterday morning." She looked at him. The calculation in his expression had resolved into something else now, something steadier, more deliberate. He took 3 steps toward her and stopped, close enough that she could see the faint fatigue around his eyes, the 3 days of compressed crisis that a man like him wore without complaint and without asking anyone to notice. "You came into my house to build a case," he said, "against the same organization that is currently trying to burn what's left of my empire. You spent 11 months learning this household from the inside. You mapped every exit. Don't look surprised. I saw the notes in your room, the building schematics, the shift rotation patterns. You were meticulous." She said nothing. "And then my children needed someone," he continued, "and you stopped doing your job and started doing something else entirely. Something nobody asked you to do and nobody could have paid you to do." He paused. "I want to know which part of that was the plan." The question landed softly, which made it hit harder. "None of it," she said quietly. "The boys weren't part of the plan." Something shifted in his face. Not much, just enough. "Then stay," he said. "Not as staff, as an ally. You have information I need, and I have resources you need, and we both want Jade Dragon dismantled before the end of the month." That's a very clean way to frame it. "I'm a practical man." "You're a dangerous man," she said. "There's a difference. You're not afraid of dangerous." She looked at him for a long moment. Through the corridor wall, faint and distant, she could hear the sounds of the temporary nursery, Mrs. O's voice low and soothing, and underneath it the specific babbling of Hari, discovering something new and narrating it to himself with great intensity. Her chest did something inconvenient. "If I stay," she said, "it's not as a maid. I know that. And I answer to myself, not to Bake, not to your security division, Jennifer." He said her name the way he'd been saying it since the garden, like he'd decided it was important and was practicing giving it the weight it deserved. "You walk through fire for my sons. You can have whatever terms you want." She looked at the door, then at him. Then she put her bag down. "I want access to the full Jade Dragon file," she said. "Everything your investigators have. Done. And I want to see the evidence they used to frame my father." "Already pulled." She blinked. He had already pulled it. Before she'd agreed, before she'd turned around. He had been certain she would stay. She didn't know whether to be furious about that or not. "You're very arrogant," she said. "I prefer prepared." "You saved my blood," he said quietly then, something beneath the practicality, something she hadn't heard from him before. Unguarded, low, real. "Now you belong to it. That's not a contract. That's just true." She picked her bag back up, held it for a moment. Then she handed it to him. "Show me the files," she said. He almost smiled. She filed that away, stored it next to the memory of him on the floor of the nursery at dawn, his charcoal suit jacket folded across his knee, his sons breathing around him. Almost, she thought. But not quite yet. What happened next surprised everyone in the estate except Mrs. O, who claimed she'd seen it coming since month 4 and had simply been waiting for everyone else to catch up. Jennifer moved out of the service quarters and into the East Wing's rebuilt guest suite. The reconstruction had taken 6 days, which Koo had pushed to 4 through the application of significant money and mild threats. She was given access to the security division's operations room, Jade Dragon's full dossier, and a wardrobe that appeared one morning outside her door in unmarked garment bags that she strongly suspected Koo had ordered and would deny ordering. She found the first bag, opened it, pulled out a black high-collared dress that was simultaneously the most elegant and most functional garment she'd ever held, structured for movement, pockets deep enough to be useful, and stood in her doorway holding it. Mrs. O walked past, glanced at it, and kept walking. "Don't say anything," Jennifer said. "I'm not saying anything," Mrs. O said serenely, and disappeared around the corner. What Jennifer had not told Koo, what she revealed on the 4th morning, when Baek made the tactical error of suggesting she be assigned to the periphery of the Jade Dragon counter-operation in a support capacity, given her civilian background, was the full scope of what her father had taught her. She was in the operations room. Baek had just finished outlining his security strategy for the coming week, 12 men in formation around a table, when Jennifer pointed at the 3rd diagram and said, "This is wrong." Baek looked at her. "I'm sorry? Your entry coverage here leaves a 45-second window on the North Corridor when 2 of your units cross. Jade Dragon's advance team will be watching for exactly that. My father ran peacekeeping operations in 4 conflict zones. I grew up in his briefing rooms. This gap will get someone killed." 12 men looked at Baek. Baek looked at the diagram. Then he looked at Jennifer. "Show me," he said. She showed him. She rerouted the North Corridor coverage, restructured the exterior rotation, and identified 2 additional vulnerabilities in the estate's rebuilt security grid that his team had missed. She did it in under 20 minutes, standing at the board in the black dress with a marker in her hand like she'd been doing it her whole life. Because she had. She just hadn't told anyone. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then one of the younger guards, Kim, 26, who had joined the Mejok Security Division 8 months ago and still had the earnest quality of someone who hadn't yet learned to hide his reactions, said, "Where did you train?" "My father's backyard in Lagos," she said, "and then wherever he was stationed. And before that, I was very motivated," she said. Kim nodded slowly, as though this explained everything. Koo was in the doorway. She didn't know how long he'd been there. Long enough, from the expression on his face, that same resolved calculation settled now into something that looked almost like wonder, quickly controlled. "Baek," he said, still looking at Jennifer, "implement her changes. Sir, and revise her designation. She's not support." Baek, to his considerable credit, didn't even hesitate. "Yes, sir." Later, in the corridor, Koo fell into step beside her. "Your father taught you well," he said. "My father taught me everything." A pause. "He's the reason I'm here. I'm not going to stop until his name is clear." "It will be," Koo said. Not a comfort. A statement of fact, made by a man who had decided something and did not go back on decisions. She looked at him sideways. "You can't promise that. I can promise that Jade Dragon won't be operational long enough to keep the charges standing." She walked 3 more steps with that. "That is either very reassuring," she said, "or very alarming. It can be both." She almost smiled. She filed that away too. The Red Banquet had been Koo's idea, which in retrospect, everyone agreed was either brilliant or catastrophic, depending on which side of the evening you survived. The logic was clean. Announce a formal gathering of Seoul's underworld elite, present a facade of normalcy, and use the event as a trap. If Jade Dragon was as embedded in his network as the paper trail suggested, they would move on the banquet. They couldn't resist it. A room full of Majok's allies, his guard ostensibly down, champagne in crystal glasses, and a man who had lost half his estate looking like he was pretending everything was fine. They would come. And when they came, Jennifer and Bayek's restructured security would be waiting. The estate's restored main hall looked, on the surface, exactly as it always had on formal occasions. Long tables, low lighting, the specific quiet elegance of extreme wealth made architectural. Men in dark suits. Women in things that cost more than houses. The careful performance of people who did terrible things and had learned to do them beautifully. Jennifer was at the far end of the hall in the black dress, not serving, standing. Several guests noticed her and looked at Ku with the question in their eyes. He gave them nothing. He was very good at giving nothing, and he'd had 3 days to perfect the particular blankness he'd adopted to prevent any of his own people from being tipped off about the real purpose of the evening. Beck's voice came through her earpiece at 9:47 p.m. North entrance, 4 vehicles. They're not on the guest list. How many? 12, minimum, armed. Jennifer set down her glass. She touched Ku's arm once, the prearranged signal, and his eyes found hers across the table. She saw the confirmation there. He was ready. She was already moving. The panic room was on the sublevel, 3 minutes from the main hall, reinforced steel, biometric lock that Ku had changed 4 days ago to include her handprint. Inside, the triplets, Mrs. O, and 2 of their most trusted guards. She reached it in 2 minutes 40 seconds because she stopped once in the east corridor when a man came through the service entrance with his jacket wrong. Jacket wrong meant tactical vest underneath. Tactical vest at a banquet meant he wasn't a waiter. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. "Hello," Jennifer said, and put him on the floor in 4 seconds using a takedown her father had drilled into her at age 15 in the Lagos afternoon heat, cursing cheerfully in Yoruba every time she got it wrong, until she never got it wrong. She took his radio, kept moving. The panic room. Biometric lock. The door opened, and Mrs. O looked up from where she was sitting with all 3 boys in her lap. All 3, somehow, which spoke to either Mrs. O's capability or the boys' collective decision to cooperate in a crisis. "It's starting," Jennifer said. "I know," Mrs. O said. "Jun wet himself. I've handled it. I need you to stay here. Don't open this door for anyone except me or Mr. Majok. Not Baik, not anyone else. Me or him. Understood." Mrs. O paused. "Jennifer?" She was already checking the room's secondary camera feeds on the wall panel. "Yes? Come back." She looked at the old woman, at the sharp eyes and the steady hands, and the 20 years of a woman who had survived this family and this world through the application of absolute practicality, and, Jennifer now knew, a deep and quiet love for this house and everyone in it. "I'll come back," she said. She locked them in from the outside. What happened in the main hall over the next 22 minutes would become the kind of story that moved through Seoul's underworld in whispers. Not shouted, never documented, but passed from careful mouth to careful ear until it had the quality of legend. Jade Dragon had sent their best. 12 men, coordinated entry, the specific confidence of an organization that had bought its way into every room in this city and believed money made you invincible. They had not accounted for Ku Majok, who had spent 3 days letting them believe he was weakened while rebuilding every layer of his defenses with a woman who had grown up in war rooms. They had not accounted for a security formation that closed like a fist around every entry point before the first shot was fired. And they had not accounted for Jennifer, who came back through the east corridor with a requisitioned radio and the kind of calm that only comes from being raised by a man who had walked into genuine chaos and taught his daughter that fear was information, not instruction. Ku found her in the corridor outside the main hall. The immediate threat was neutralized. His men had the remaining Jade Dragon operatives contained. The guests, many of whom had seen far worse in their professional lives and had responded to the emergency with the practiced composure of people who kept lawyers on speed dial, were being managed by Baik. Ku looked at her. She had a bruise forming on her right cheekbone. She'd taken a hit at some point, and he hadn't seen it happen, and he felt something cold move through him at that thought, colder than strategy, colder than calculation. "The boys," he said. "Safe. Mrs. O has them. Panic room is secure." He exhaled, One breath, fully released, and then he looked at her again. Really looked, the way he'd been looking since the garden, but without the careful distance now, without the drawer and the lock. "You're hurt," he said. "It's minor," she said, and then caught herself because she'd said that before, and he'd sat in a clinic chair for 2 hours afterward, and something about the memory of it moved across her face before she could stop it. He reached up. His hand hovered near her face for a moment, asking, in the way of a man who was not accustomed to asking, and then his thumb touched the edge of the bruise, careful as something that cost him something. She didn't pull back. "Thank you," he said. "You don't have to." Jennifer, her name again with that weight he'd been giving it. "Thank you." She looked at him in the quiet corridor, the sounds of the aftermath moving around them like water around stone, and she said nothing. Sometimes silence is the only true answer. 3 days after the Red Banquet, in the same hall, cleared and restored with the same ruthless efficiency that characterized everything in this house, Kumajok gathered his people. Not the formal performance of the banquet. Something different. Smaller, deliberate, the way a man gathers people when he wants them to understand something permanent. The Jade Dragon operatives were being processed through channels that would result in consequences forward. Jennifer did not need to know the specific details of their leadership, the men who had framed Colonel Adisa Mensa, who had fed Minhe's gambling debt, who had spent years dismantling the Majok Empire from the inside, were no longer a problem. The evidence Jennifer had spent 11 months building had been combined with Ku's investigators' financial trail and delivered to a prosecutor who owed Ku a debt significant enough to guarantee action. Her father's file had been reopened. The timeline, Mrs. O told her quietly over tea, was weeks. Minhee had been found, had returned briefly when her lawyers told her the alternative. Ku had met with her once, alone, for 40 minutes. Jennifer didn't ask what was said. She knew from the way the divorce papers appeared on the legal desk the following morning, already signed, that the meeting had been one of Ku's most efficient. Now he stood at the front of the assembled room, and Jennifer stood to his left, not behind him, not to the side, in the way the staff stood, but beside him, which everyone in the room understood was not an accident. Ku did nothing by accident. This house, he said, survived an attack that was designed to destroy everything in it. It survived because of loyalty, not the loyalty you pay for, the kind you can't buy, the kind that runs toward fire when every reasonable instinct says to run away. The room was still. Jennifer Mensa, he said, and he said her full name with the ease of someone who had been practicing it in private and was now done pretending he hadn't been, came to this estate 11 months ago. She saved my sons. She held this house together when the people paid to protect it failed. She identified the breach that would have destroyed this family. He looked at her. She looked back. She is not staff, he said. She is not a guest. She is the lady of this house. Anyone who addresses her as anything less answers to me. The room stayed quiet for one breath, two, and then the men started to move, the subtle repositioning of people who understood power and had just watched it publicly transferred, acknowledged, made permanent. Mrs. O, in the back of the room, pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling. Jennifer recognized the expression. It was the almost smile. She'd inherited it, apparently. Later, much later, when the room had emptied and the house had settled into its nighttime hum, and somewhere on the second floor, Hari was banging something against his crib rail in contented rhythm, Jennifer stood at the window of the main hall and looked out at Seoul. She heard Ku come to stand beside her. "You planned the entire thing," she said. "The banquet, the announcement, all of it." "I'm a practical man. You keep saying that. It keeps being true." She looked at the city, the lights, the movement, the vast indifferent machinery of a place that had swallowed her father's name and her family's dignity in 11 months of her life. It looked the same as it always had. Cities didn't change when your story changed, they just kept going. But she felt different standing in it. "My father," she said. "When his name is cleared, bring him here," Ku said, simply, without hesitation. She turned to look at him. "This is a large house," he said. "It has been missing people in it who actually belong." She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. He was not, she had learned, a man who looked away first. But he was also not, she was learning, a man who looked at you like you owed him something. He looked at her like she was the answer to a question he was still figuring out how to ask. "You're still arrogant," she said. "And you're still here," he said. The city moved below them. Somewhere upstairs, Hari's banging stopped, replaced, a moment later, by June's voice, narrating something to himself in the serious, earnest tones of a baby who had decided the world required commentary. Jennifer looked up at the ceiling. Something moved across her face. Not the small, contained smile she'd spent 11 months perfecting, but the other one. The real one. The one she hadn't used in a very long time. She let it stay. "He's going to wake his brothers," she said. "He already did," Ku said. And she laughed. Actually laughed. In this house, in this city, in this life that had stopped being a plan somewhere around month 3 and had become, without her permission, something she wanted to keep. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is reaching.